what I have done with the creation of this slide set is that these are the questions that I go through with my clients and with the people that I'm counseling, to help them focus and be prepared to apply for grant funding. All right, so let's just jump into it. Um, what we're going to talk about today is the creation of what I like to call an unsolicited proposal. The unsolicited proposal is just that. You put together a proposal that nobody asked you to put together. And some people will say, well, why would I do that? Why wouldn't I just wait for a request for proposal, somebody to ask me, okay, there's a question that came up and I'll answer it in just a moment. Um, so people will say, why an unsolicited proposal? Why not wait for an RFP or a request for a proposal, and just wait for that to respond so that you are responding in a very targeted way? I try to use dating and other things that are common to people to understand, as metaphors for business. So using dating as one for this situation, an RFP is like going on one of the dating sites and someone says, hey, I am looking for this. I am looking for someone who is 6 feet tall, who has a good job, lives in Baltimore City, and like, if someone has these types of requirements, if you are not 6 feet tall, if you live in Kalamazoo, if you don't have a job, then you know that that's not for you. And so that's more like the RFP. An RFP organization will say, hey, we want somebody who is going to work with children who have mental health issues in Baltimore City. Now, if you run a manufacturing training program in Howard County, then you shouldn't apply. So that's the RFP. RFP is organization looking for something very specific, and you need to be able to match that and show them why you should be selected. Now, an unsolicited proposal is more like, you're flipping through Facebook, Instagram, or what have you, and you see someone who catches your attention. And so what you do in that case is that you send them a list of things that's awesome about you. And that's more like an unsolicited proposal. They didn't ask. They didn't even say that they were looking for anything. They didn't say that they were available, but you saw them and you said, hey, I think that I think that we would be cool together. The unsolicited proposal that happens a lot of times where let's say you're reading a news article and you find out that the Baltimore City Chamber of Commerce just got money from the federal government to do economic development in the city. We haven't asked for anything, but you say, hey, I'm really good at writing business plans. So you send us your resume, or you send us a proposal to do business plans. That's a proposal you sent to us that we didn't ask for, so it's unsolicited. The other reason that I suggest doing unsolicited proposals is because you want to make sure that while you have time, that you're able to create the best look, the best opportunity, or best representation of your program. If you have an unsolicited proposal, you can just work on that because there's no timelines, there's no deadlines. You are working on it. The other thing that I've learned over the course of my career is that a lot of times RFPs come out with 30 days notice, and sometimes you don't find out about them until 2 weeks have passed. So that means that you have to take everything that you were going to be doing for the next 2 weeks, put it on hold, and develop a grant application or response to the proposal, to the request for proposal, within 2 weeks. Most of us don't have that kind of time that we can just pull away and stop everything we're doing and just focus on writing a grant. But if you have an unsolicited proposal, you can take that unsolicited proposal and you can edit it. You can tweak it so that it meets the requirements of the request for proposal, and you can just submit it. It's a lot easier, trust me, to take a proposal that you've already written that represents your organization and tweak it so that it meets the needs of an RFP than to try to stop everything and get it done. The question that I received was that, can you have a nonprofit and own an LLC? That answer is yes, except that's one of those questions that I need to understand the context in which you're doing it. So you can have an LLC that owns a 501c3, and by and large, just for clarity, I'm going to be speaking about 501c3 organizations. Nonprofits, there are more than 20 different 501c types of organizations, but the one that is most commonly used for grant applications and things like that are the 501c3 variety. So that's what I'll be speaking to. So you can have an LLC that owns a 501c3, not owns, let me take that back, that starts a 501c3. As we talked about in our earlier session on starting a nonprofit, no one actually owns a nonprofit organization. The nonprofit, the public charity, is designed for the public benefit. It is managed and operated and governed by its board of directors. And the board of directors are responsible for ensuring that the organization is in compliance. So no one really owns a nonprofit organization. Conversely, you can have a nonprofit organization, a 501c3, that is created and owns an LLC. So you can do that, but depending on the structure of your organization or the structure of your operations, I'm hesitant to say there is a, hey, this is a one size fits all answer, because a lot of it has to do with the nuance. I hope that answers your question. If not, drop another one in and I'll do my best to clarify. So looking at these grant proposal elements, these are kind of the ones when you look at the overall structure. Now, overall structure, these are the kind of tabs or the elements that people are looking for, or grantors are looking for, when they review your grant proposal. The first is the proposal summary, but that's, in my opinion, the section that should be completed last. Because, you know, how are you going to summarize something you haven't written yet? So working on the summary section last. Your organizational introduction, the need statement, and in my opinion, the need statement is the most important part of your grant application. Actually, it's the most important part of you putting together your business, your program or your nonprofit. Your project goals, your project design, project management and evaluation, funding, and then your project budget. So, one of the other things that, as your organization matures, these are some of the things that you need to already have on standby. When you create your nonprofit organization, you file what are called articles of incorporation with the state of Maryland. You need to make sure that you have those articles of incorporation on standby. Most of the organizations that I work with, they have either a Dropbox or some type of cloud storage, secure cloud storage, that they keep these documents in, so that when it's time to access these documents to apply for a grant, they're already good to go. You need to make sure that you have your certificate of good standing, and that you need to have one of those every year. Your employee identification number, which is basically your business's social security number, your IRS determination that you have been designated a 501c3 organization, or if you're not a 501c3 organization, a letter from your fiscal sponsor indicating that they are overseeing your operations and the like. You should also have your bylaws, your mission and vision, your nonprofit's tax returns, which are called the 990s for most nonprofits. And in some cases, you'll need the certification from the Maryland Secretary of State. A lot of this stuff we covered in the first session, and that first session, for those of you all who may have missed the first or second sessions, if you visit the Baltimore City branch of the NAACP's Facebook page, those sessions are still available for you to review the video footage from there. And also, there are some funders who are going to ask you for an audit. Audits, to be honest, don't normally happen below the $50,000 mark. Audits normally happen when you are asking for more than 100,000, or if your organization has met certain size thresholds requiring an annual audit. And one of the reasons that they don't require audits a lot of times is because audits can be expensive. Organizations that I've worked with, audits range normally in the $10,000 to $20,000 range. All right. So what services do you provide? Specifically focusing on core services, because a lot of times what happens is that we don't think about the services that nonprofits and nonprofit founders may not really understand the full scope of the services that they provide. There may be something, so for example, if you have a after school program that you're running, and one of the things that you realized was that as you're running this program, you find that there are a lot of students who are hungry, and so you start a food component. That's not part of your core service, but well, at least with one organization, what they found is that the provision of food in their tutoring or after school program started driving an increase in the number of people who came to the program. And so they ended up having to apply for funding to support the food aspect of the program, because they already had volunteers who were helping with, doing homework help and stuff like that, in partnership with some local colleges and universities. And so while they didn't think the food thing would be part of their core businesses or part of their core services, it quickly did. And that provided them an opportunity to really talk about the needs of the population and the people that they serve, and really positioning their organization as a central one to address kind of some more of the major needs of the populations that they serve. One of the other things that my experience has been that nonprofit organizations don't necessarily do a really good job of is being able to explain why their organization is qualified to deliver services. As I've said before, for those of you all who've joined other sessions or seen or work with me in other things, competence and compassion are not the same thing. You can have compassion for the population, you can have passion for the cause, but that does not make you competent to deliver services. And so one of the things that your organization in the introduction of your organization, you really need to make sure that you are able to explain why you care about or not you care about why you are able to deliver services in a way that the target population needs. And let me tell you why this is important. I have been a grant reviewer. I've reviewed contracts and have worked with a number of organizations in preparation and review. And if I receive a grant application and all they talk about on all that the application talks about is how much they care or how much they love or how much they, how passionate they are and that's what they bring to the table, I'm going to be honest, that organization, that grant application gets downgraded, in my opinion. Um, uh, that organization gets downgraded, in my opinion, because it I can't trust that when the organization that's issuing the grant gives it to you, that you've not made a showing that you can even deliver the services or that you know what you're doing. So spend a lot of time talking through, or just if not even talking, thinking through what makes you qualified to deliver the services. Um, these are as I mentioned, and I know some of you joined a little later, these are not the things that every grant application is going to ask you for. But these, for me, are the things that you should be prepared to talk about. So if you spend time preparing all of the answers to all of these questions, there'll be very few grant applications that are going to come along and that you won't be prepared to respond to, no matter how much time you have, how much time is left for you to complete the application. So again, to me, it's really important to address these, but also recognize that this is your organization. If you feel that you don't need to do these things right now, that's fine. Absolutely. I just hope that you're talented and skilled enough so that when it is time to do it, you can turn it around very quickly and it becomes a quality document. Because don't forget that these are sales documents. You are not going to be the only organization asking for funding in most cases. There are going to be other organizations that may be more talented than or have more experience than you, may have different assets or resources than you do. And so the more favorably you can describe what you are able to do, the more likely it is that you can be competitive and get the funding that you seek. Um, Other organizational information like your organizational history, your mission, vision, awards, board, staff, data, budget, etc. If you have uh, worked with a population of students and or a population and there has been success, there have been positive outcomes, make sure that you describe them in your organization's introduction. You'll be able to go into greater details in other portions of the grant application, but make sure that that's a celebrated thing in your organization. If you have one organization that they do a wonderful job in placement of hard to place individuals. I think their placement is in the 80% range, whereas a lot of organizations, and that's 80% retaining the job after 6 months in the job. Not just I got you a job, but it's a job that you have been in and have stayed in for 6 months. Their retention or their placement and retention is up to about 80 some percent in a field and with populations where other people are doing, you know, 30, 40-ish. Well, that's something that should be very much highlighted in the organization introduction, because in the beginning, that sets your organization apart from everybody else. Now, one of the things that that becomes discouraging on this slide when I've been talking about it, and I want to make sure that I address it here, is that some organizations that are new, they kind of feel like, well, we don't have that. We don't have anything to talk about. You know, we're brand new. That isn't necessarily true. Your organization may be brand new, your paperwork may be brand new, but many of you all have been engaging in these services for years. Many of you all have been engaging the population for years. And so instead of, again, never lie on one of these things, because once you get caught lying, very difficult for you to get funding ever again. Because all of these people, we all work with each other, we all know each other. And sometimes before we do funding, we'll reach out and say, hey, have you heard of this organization, or what do you know about them? And if somebody says, oh, well, they lied, then it doesn't bode well for you. But you can say things like, our organization is, while our organization is new, our staff has 40 years of experience working with this population. Our team is composed of leaders from multiple backgrounds who have demonstrated competencies, and starting to say things like that, because you can't speak to the fact that your organization has done these things, but presumably your team has. So the need statement, as I mentioned in the introduction, I think the need statement is the most important part of your planning of your grant application of it all, because that's what your organization or that's what your program is designed to do, is designed to address a need. And if you don't really understand the need, then what the hell are you actually doing? Just doing stuff to make yourself feel better? Why would anybody give you money for that? That's your job. You can use your money to make yourself feel better. But if you're looking to address the needs of a particular population, you need to understand that population, and you need to be able to articulate the needs very clearly. All right, the first question, and it's really straightforward, but you would be surprised how many people overlook this. How do you know that the target population needs to be helped? And so what an example of this is when you see actually I don't have an example, it just slipped my mind, but you need to make sure that you know that the target population needs to be helped. Just because if you project in yourself in a situation, said, if I was in that situation, I would need help. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that that person in that situation needs your help. So make sure that you are able to articulate how you know that the population that you're planning to serve, or the issue you plan to address, actually needs additional resources. And then the next is to explain how you know that the help that you plan to offer or that you're offering is actually appropriate for the target population. Now, for that one, there are a number of examples. And I stick with education for right now. There are a lot of times where people will look at testing outcomes and say, well, what they need is that they need more time in class. Well, how do you know that that's what is absolutely necessary, or that is what's necessary for the students that you're seeking to help? There are ways that you find that information out. I recommend, you can do surveys on your own. You can identify individuals who are subject matter experts. You can identify reports that say that, hey, for the population that you're trying to help, the help that you're offering is appropriate, or this is the type of help that they need. But you need to be able to justify that, because again, if I am working for a funder, and the funder says, and you say, well, they need this help, and it is inconsistent with what I am familiar with, or with what the funder is familiar with, we're going to question that. Sometimes we fall into those people. We fall, where we say that, well, oh, I know what those people need. Oh, and I'm sure many of you have seen those movies, 80s, 90s, 2000, and even recently, where there is a population in the inner city who have poor outcomes, the levels of violence and things like that. And then what happens is that this savior comes from outside the population, and they bring this tough love or whatever, and it magically resolves everything for the population. But a more realistic view of it is what's happening in Portland right now, where there is civil unrest and protesting, people protesting racial injustice and police brutality. And the federal government decided that the most appropriate type of assistance that the government needs was sending federal officers, undesignated federal officers in unmarked vehicles to pull protesters off the street. Now, I don't know what best practices they were looking for, but in my estimation, and from a lot of people who are subject matter experts, that is not the type of help that population needs. Okay. The next is, what data have you used to determine the need? So making sure that you understand the nuances of the funder that you're looking for, or the area. So one of the realities in Maryland, particularly in Baltimore, but in Maryland throughout, is that if you are doing something that deals with health, you need to make sure that you have reviewed the data and documentation and reports issued by Johns Hopkins University, or Johns Hopkins Medicine. Because Johns Hopkins, given their world-renowned reputation in issues, particularly in health, and particularly, especially now, in public health, if you are doing something in that space, and Johns Hopkins has written a report or has some information that you have not addressed, then the reality is that people who are reviewing your grant or reviewing your application are going to wonder, do you even know what you're talking about? Because even if you don't agree with the report, you need to at least address it, because the rest of us have probably read it, and we may not understand that there may be some nuances that are important, or some errors, or some deviations, or some variances with the population that you're dealing with, or that something about your program may be innovative where it falls outside the scope of the report. But you didn't even address it, so we just assume that you don't know what you're talking about. And I hate to put it in terms that harsh, but that's the reality. So again, if you've never worked with me before, I'm not the person to come to about your feelings, because I got to be honest, don't really care that much, because I would much rather you be good than you feel good. There are some business consultants and attorneys or whomever that really focus on making sure that individuals, everybody they work with, feels good. That's not my thing. Because no matter how you feel, if you send me a garbage grant application, I'm going to treat it like it's a garbage grant application. And I'd much rather you spend time being good than feeling good. So that's the thing about data. You may have your own data. If your data is inconsistent with the prevailing information that is out there, you need to explain why your data is correct, or why it's different than everything else. Making sure you're able to articulate what resources are needed to address the problem. Just because you identified the problem and say that you're capable of helping, that doesn't mean you have the resources that are necessary to help. So being able to articulate what resources are necessary also goes a long way in getting people to understand that you understand how to do this work. The last thing that I'm going to cover on this slide, but again, if there are things that you want me to cover, I'm more than happy to do it. Are other organizations addressing the population's needs, and how are you different? There is this sense for a lot of time for many businesses that I've worked with, and particularly nonprofits, that when they become aware of a problem in the universe or a problem with the population, they believe that it's the first time anybody's become aware of it, because for them the solution is so simple. Clearly, no one has thought about it before. One of the things that comes up, and I'm sure there's somebody on the call who believes this. One of the things that comes up often is creating a one-stop shop or one-stop center, where all of these people, all of the people in the target population can be supported and served in one space, making sure that their needs are handled in a holistic manner along the entire continuum. That is not a novel idea. It absolutely isn't. There have been hundreds of people who have thought that, and there have been dozens of people who've tried. But depending on what population you're working with, what resources and what needs you're attempting to meet, it does not necessarily mean that that makes sense for the population. There are some times where it is so it is cost prohibitive to pull together a one-stop shop. Additionally, some of the needs are long-term, some of the needs are short-term, and so being able to compartmentalize and compartmentalize at the same time integrating all of those functions sometimes becomes a logistical nightmare. But if you don't have experience, or if you have not done enough research to find out why one doesn't exist, and talking to people who've been in the game, who've been engaged in the work for a long time, or just set an appointment with me so I can point you in the direction of people who are able to give you that background. You will come to the table and you will put in your application, we can create a one-stop center in this part of the city or this area, and it will be, exceptionally helpful, blah, 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 and not realize that it may have already been tried. And because you don't have that information, you aren't even able to explain how yours would be different. So again, make sure that if there are other organizations in there, volunteer with them. Find out what they're doing. Find out if you can be a partner of theirs. Because you may find out, especially if you are able to get beyond the service delivery into helping them and understanding what their management and things look like, you may be in a better position to start an organization that can really transform lives and address issues, instead of not understanding why people are rejecting your grant applications and things like that. Okay. Once you understand the needs, then you can put together your project goals, because remember, your goals are designed to address the needs. And so if you don't understand what the needs are, how are you going to create goals? What goals does your project hope to accomplish? Those can really be outgrowths of the need statement. If you find that one of the biggest needs is that children between the eight, well, actually, I'll use our organization, the Baltimore City Chamber of Commerce. One of the things that I'll use this workshop series. One of the needs that we identified was that there were many individuals who wanted to start nonprofit organizations, but didn't have an idea of what to do to start. So we went through this process. Well, I went through this process, and we got to the point of pulling together this workshop series. And so the goals that we want to accomplish is, by the end of the third workshop series, we will have educated people on how to start a nonprofit, how to create a program, and how to apply for grants. Ta-da! Because those are the things that we found in our research, that those are some of the things that we're missing. So again, understanding how the needs how meeting the needs leads to you being able to articulate your goals. Understanding that there are a difference between goals, objectives, and activities. Goals are kind of the larger things that you want to do. And I always recommend that you look at SMART goals. And I don't have that slide here. Whoops, I'm going the wrong direction. Wait, what's happening? Okay. SMART goals. SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And so you want to make sure that your goals are that you can look up SMART goals online, and they're thousands of articles that kind of walk you through how to create SMART goals. Objectives are kind of the subgroup of goals, because objectives are groups of activities that lead to the portions of the goals. And so, for example, having the goal to do this workshop series, we needed to have objectives. So part of the objectives were marketing, part of the objectives were managing registration, part of the objectives were putting together the workshops. So each of those objectives were designed to group the activities that go along with them. And then making sure that those goals, objectives, and activities are related to the needs, because there's nothing more frustrating than seeing an organization or grant application's goals that you can't figure out why this is a goal, or an activity like, why are they doing this? Now, if you have a tutoring program and one of your goals is to feed 100 students during the school year, or an average, let's say, to be able to feed an average of 40 students every day. Well, that goal doesn't make sense because you haven't linked it to a need. So if you talk about the need for educational attainment and reducing the achievement gap, and then but forget to mention that part of the need, or part of the challenge, or one of the barriers to achievement is that these kids can't come to the after school program because they're hungry, or they don't pay attention, or they don't retain information because they're hungry. You haven't identified that as a need. And then to have a goal that just says you're going to feed an average of 40 kids a day, I don't understand why you want money for that. And why will we give you money for that? Because that's not something you said you do. But that's why you need to be able to link them to the needs, because it gets frustrating. And one piece of information, you do not want the grant reviewer to have to think, because because that means they have to give you the benefit of the doubt. They have to do additional research, and never forget, there are at least a stack of 20 of these on their desk. And so it's easier to just find one that is compliant than to try to make yours make sense. Okay. So when you are going back for your goals and your goals and objectives, and when you look at each activity, how do you measure each activity? If you say we're going to have workshops, so for example, we have workshops. One of the things that you all realize is that you all had to sign in when you all register and sign in when you came to this workshop. Why? Because this is how we measure how many people attend. And so without that type of metric, then we're just guessing, and also there's some trust issues. If you say, because if I don't have the sign-in sheet, or I don't have you all register, there could have been like 200 people on here tonight instead of 23. Or there could have been 5 people. I don't know. But because we have the sign-ins, now we know. And we're able to articulate that when we're talking to potential funders, or when we're giving reports about the activities in which we're engaged. The final is to be able to articulate what the time frame is for accomplishing the activities. Fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of grant funding is focused on time. How many can you help in a year? How many you have a 3-year grant in 3 years to achieve this, that, or the third. And so being able to articulate how much you can do when your activities occur, how to do the time frame, those are very important, so that you can be in a position so that the grant reviewers and your grantors understand what they're working with in a meaningful way. When I talk about Delta, what that means is, in science and mathematics, Delta represents change. So if you're talking about Delta T, that's the change in time. If you're talking about Delta D, lowercase d, that's the change in distance. But that's what your program should be, and your organization should be focused on. What is the change? People come to your program, or your program starts to deal with an issue, and then there needs to be, your program does something, and there should be a change. What funders are looking to fund is the change that you're creating. If you are just sitting, if I tell you that, hey, give me $50,000 and I'll do a bunch of workshops. Okay, that's cool, but what will the workshops do? Oh no, I'm just going to do the workshops. Okay, so how is that going to help any people? Well, I'll do the workshops and they can see me do the workshops. Like, when you hear it that way, it sounds silly. Like, why would I give you money just to do workshops? But if you look down, and I'm going to go use this as an example, that's just expressing my delta. That's expressing what I do. So a lot of times, like, this is a SMART goal. By December 31st, 2020, the Baltimore City Chamber of Commerce will host 24 training sessions for nonprofit organizations. Well, that's what we do. And again, if we're asking somebody from funding, it's like, give us funding so we can host these 24 training sessions. The question is going to be like, why should we do that? Like, what is going to be the change? What are these sessions going to do? Now look at what a delta, if I rewrite the delta in a way that talks about the impact. By December 31st, 2020, 15 members of the Baltimore City Chamber of Commerce will attain $300,000 in grant funding. Well, that talks about what impact we have on the to the members of the Baltimore City Chamber of Commerce. It expresses our activity in terms of the change that we have. And so, as you are thinking about your organization, think about whether you're working with kids, adults, working on the environment, racial justice. What change will your organization have? A lot of it can be ascribed and kind of guided by what you've written in your mission and your vision statement, but please focus on the change. Because if you just tell me what you're going to do and not its impact, I got 19 other applications on my desk that one of them is probably going to say it the right way. What resources are needed to execute each activity? We've covered that a little bit in a couple of slides ago. But again, really thinking that through. You notice that that's a recurring theme, because we'll talk a little bit more about it when we get to the budget area. But also think about the resources that are necessary, not just the cash, but the resources. Provide a walkthrough of the client's experience. As a nonprofit organization, you have two different constituencies that you serve. The first constituency is the one that we normally think of, the people who receive services, or the things that we do to that meet the delta. The other constituency is the organization that writes the organizational individuals that write the check. You need to make sure that you are thinking through both of their needs, because the reality is that sometimes those needs aren't clearly aligned. I've been both on the application side of grants and also the review side of grants, where I've had to give pushback to the funder and letting them know that I get that you're looking for this, but you need to think about it differently, because the premise upon which you are basing your expectations or your funding decisions doesn't really work in real life. And so if you are able to provide a walkthrough of your client's experiences, and as much detail as you want, or as much detail as you need, you'll not only be able to explain to your funder any types of gaps in their funding requirements or their RFP or what have you. You'll be able to show them how your program is different and how your program can meet the needs in a way that other programs may not. Additionally, if you have a walkthrough of your engagement with the funder, it also puts you in a better position. How often do you contact the funder? How often do you send information to them and things like that? It gives you kind of a working document on how you are engaging and how you are helping people, or how you are, how you are doing along the way. Those things are very important when it comes to the networking that you do with a potential funder. I have a process that I use, and I think we covered it the last time. It's called AEDE and ROR. AEDE stands for awareness, engagement, delivery, and evaluation. Because there is going to be a time where your program participants or clients, they have no idea that your project exists. They have no idea that your organization exists. So what do you need to do to get them to be aware of it? Then once they're aware of it, you need them to engage, to register, to do something. So what is it that you need to do to get them to engage your organization? The acronym is AEDE: awareness, engagement, delivery, and evaluation. And so once they have been engaged, do they need to fill out, is there an eligibility requirement? Do they need to fill out paperwork? Do they need to get permission? Do they need to bring money? Do they need to bring some documents, some ID? And by walking that experience, you make sure that you don't have mm, any gaps for from your organization, not your organization, your client's perspective. There was an organization, actually a jurisdiction, who had decided that they were going to step up their support for victims of domestic violence. And so what they did is that they had this training and they created this integrated system for victims of domestic violence where there was no wrong door. And so whether you showed up at the hospital with the police, at a homeless shelter, at a domestic violence center, or at a domestic violence provider, each one of those organizations was trained and integrated on how to walk you through. So let's say I show up at the hospital. I have a stab wound because my significant other was upset with me, came at me with a knife and stabbed me. That's horrible. And so I show up at the hospital. They recognize that I'm a victim of domestic violence, and they ask me, do I have a safe place to stay? And I say no. And they say, hold on. They call the shelter and they let them know that I'm on my way there. And they even provide transportation. So far, this sounds wonderful. But then I get there and they say, okay, so what happened? And I say, well, my significant other got angry. This isn't the first time that we have gotten into it. She got angry, came at me with a knife. Kind of my fault, I think, but I'm not quite sure. Da 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 da. And they said, cool, you can stay here. We fill out the paperwork. Everything is wonderful. And they said, well, do you have a job? And I said, no, that's been one of the things that's been pressuring our situation. And they pick up the phone, they make a phone call, they get me in, they send me to a workforce development place, they pay for transportation. Again, sounds wonderful, but when I get there, they said, so what happens? My significant other and I tell this story over and over again, and they did not understand until they looked at the data why people would make it to the first three providers, but never really followed through and never really kept going. But what they realized that they were re-traumatizing people because they did not look at it through the client's perspective. They didn't realize that telling this story, this isn't a story to a victim of domestic violence. It's not a story. This is my life. And a lot of times for victims of domestic violence, every time they tell the story, they are reliving it. And so what happens is that after you have gone through this 3 times with people meaning well, trying to help you, you just get tired of having to tell the story and get embarrassed. And you're like, you know what? I'm happy with the housing and I'm happy with the job opportunity. And, I'm not going to go and try to access any other resources. And so when they finally started having, and this goes more to the evaluation for this particular program, when they started talking to the people that they were serving, they realized that this was the problem. But had they done a walkthrough from the client's perspective first, they may have caught that earlier and been able to help people in a more comprehensive way or a more culturally competent way. Because domestic violence, there is a certain culture that exists in those spaces. Okay. Making sure that as you are doing your proposal, and these are, even if this is not for grant funding, these are just really good questions to think about. What happens to your client after they finish at your project? So if you provide help with after school help to a student, and that student starts doing better in school, are they out of your program now? Do they get additional assistance? Being able to explain what happens next becomes a critical aspect of figuring out the value of your program. Because just because you created the Delta and created a change in them doesn't mean that they are prepared for whatever comes next. And so thinking this through may mean that, hey, you found a natural partnership with another organization. So when clients leave your program, boom, you have a warm handoff to the next portion of the program, kind of like the domestic violence program I was talking about. You make sure that the individual who you are serving gets as much help as you need, because it's kind of rude to help somebody and it's like, all right, then I'm done with you. Have at it. I hope things work out well for you. Bye-bye. That's just very disrespectful. Don't do that. Don't be that organization. All right. Does your project have a limited duration or is it ongoing? As you all have probably deduced, there are a lot of nonprofit organizations who have popped up to address some of the issues around COVID-19. and the coronavirus. Well, once that that problem has been resolved and the virus, when there's a vaccine created, therapeutics, the need for all of these organizations will start to dwindle. And so figuring out, is your organization one that has a limited duration or one that is going to be ongoing? Like I imagine that when the NAACP was originally founded in the early 1900s, that I would like to believe they thought that the biggest issues would be eradicated within the first 20, 30 years, and the rest of it would just be refining. Maybe even a conversation about like, well, how are we going to wrap up this up in like 20, 30 years? I mean, 100 and some years later, we're still struggling with some of these same issues. But as you are thinking it through, figuring out what type of impact you'll have will also help you think through whether your organization is one of limited duration or is going to be necessary on an ongoing basis. All right. Are there any other questions on this project design slide? How are we doing? All right. Project management and evaluation. This is the second most important portion of your grant proposal. Because remember, your need statement identified what the needs were and basically why you're doing this. The management and evaluation portion, this explains whether you accomplished anything or not. And remember, this helps you articulate whether you met your delta. So one of the first things in evaluation is identifying or demonstrating how your activities occurred. Because again, like this, you all registering today, the sign-in sheet, it shows us that you all showed up for the workshop. And so this is how we can prove that you all came to the workshop, that we had a workshop and that people attended. How will you measure the impact of activities on the clients? And so after you all, in the next day or two after this workshop, you all will receive an evaluation link. And we ask that you go to the evaluation link and fill it out and let us know how we did. Because that's important. Because if this is not helpful, then we need to rethink what we're doing. If you all say that, oh, he speaks too fast, which is some of the feedback I've received, and I'm trying to slow down, but I get so excited about talking about this, and so I try, and that's why I'm really glad that we're recording this so you can go back and listen at your own leisure. But we measure the impact of the activities. That's why we do the evaluation, because we need to know whether this was helpful or not. Did this move your delta? Did it? Because if not, we need to rethink it. Or if there are portions of it that were incredible and portions of it that were so-so, we can really highlight the incredible portions and really build on that, and then focus on developing the portions that weren't impressive or created a challenge. But if you're not measuring the impact of these activities, or the activities that you're having, or the activities that you're doing and the impact that they're having on the clients, then you'll never know. And to be honest, it is the height of hubris to just believe that you're going to be okay and you can do it without having to measure it. No, thank you. Please make sure that you have measurements measurements of the activities in your grant proposal. Take a step back and then think of, what would success look like? A lot of times we do this when we're doing visioning, but thinking through, like, if we did this, if we did everything and everything worked out if we did everything we were thinking about and everything worked out the way that we wanted it to, or we hoped it would, what would that look like? When I worked with the Maryland AIDS administration, our vision statement was a Maryland with no new HIV infections. While that, none of us believed at the time that was something that would happen in our lifetime, it was still an aspiration. Like, if we did all the stuff that we had outlined and it all led in the same direction, we would live in a Maryland with no new HIV infections. And so when you are going through and figuring out, based on the needs and based on the activities that you've engaged in, what success looks like, be able to articulate that. Because as a grant reviewer, as a funder, we're going to want to know that. Oh, I'm sorry, real quick too, but when you also talk about what success looks like, please don't be too pie in the sky. The difference between what success looks like for our activities at the AIDS administration wasn't no new HIV infection. That was our vision. But success look like reducing the amount of HIV transmission, or educating people, having pre and post tests that demonstrate the increase in their knowledge and skill base. So again, don't get too pie in the sky, because I just thought about it. If I saw in your grant application that if we do all of this, everything will be fine, we will end poverty and hunger, I'm going to be like, oh, honey, that's really cute. I got 19 other of these on my desk. One of the things that is also important when you're doing management and evaluation is to get the baseline for the population. And when I say baseline, I'm talking about the starting point. And so I'll give an example. There are two students who went to a SAT prep class. And at the end of the SAT prep class, one of them had a score of 1520. The other one had a score of 790. Which one did the SAT prep class have the best impact on? A natural inclination, because of the way that we have engaged academics, is that we look at the big one. So the one with 1520, we assume that that's the one that had the best impact. Well, if you understood that population's baseline, you may have realized that the one with a 1520, before he took the SAT prep class, he had a 1560. So his score actually went down. The other one, who had a 790, he started with a 710. So his score went up more than 10%. And so if you understand the baseline, you can still speak to the impact of the impact of your program on the population. So let me be clear. In this SAT prep class example, I would still highlight the 1520, because I recognize that people want to hear big numbers, but I will also talk about the percentage point gain, an 80 point gain in SAT in the SAT score, or over 10% increase in the SAT score. I would highlight both of those things to show the impact, on one hand, show the type and caliber of student that we deal with, and on the other hand, showing the impact of. I wouldn't lie about them, or conflate them as being the same student, but I would make sure to highlight the benefits and the impact, the delta of the program for the second student release. There are some organizations who don't ask questions about sustainability, but again, I would much rather you spend time while you have time to think through sustainability than to not. Many of these funders don't want to be your only source of revenue, because that means that they are funding your project forever. They are looking, most grant applications, and this is real, or grants are really designed to get you started. There are exceptions, and normally those exceptions are at the larger end, where institutions are receiving money to help populations as part of, say, a government responsibility, and they have outsourced that responsibility to a nonprofit. Things like that is when the source tends not to be concerned about being your only source. But most organizations that fund nonprofit, especially small nonprofits, they're looking to use their funding as kind of seed money for your nonprofit. They want to make sure that you're able to take this and you're either able to generate program income, or identify some other donors or grantors, or some fundraising activities, or some other grants that you'll be able to access. They don't want to be your only source, because they have their funding priorities evolve and change regularly as well. And so while you may be dealing with the topic that is most passionate, that they're most passionate about right now, that doesn't mean they're going to be in the same place in a year or two. And so you need to make sure that you are focused on how do you take the money that you received and use it to roll it over to get more money. The question is, should a nonprofit have a diversified funding plan of action? I would say yes, but what that diversity needs to look like really depends on the type of nonprofit you have, the area that you're operating in, honestly, the wherewithal of your board of directors. Like, there are a lot of different nuances that go into determine what your diversified funding plan needs to look like. If you have an organization where you are your staff or your participants or somebody on your board is very popular, you may be able to host galas and events like that and get a lot of money brought in the year for that. Or there are organizations that I've worked with that do galas that, they don't make a lot of money on it, and it's more of a people raiser than it is a fundraiser. And so it really depends on your organization. And so that's one that you might want to drop in, and we'll have an appointment to talk about how to make that work. Did that answer the question? Okay, cool. So, what are your contingency plans for funding shortfalls? Very few nonprofit organizations will exist and not experience a shortfall, a funding shortfall. And so you need to be able to plan for that. Sometimes those contingency plans require layoffs. Sometimes they require a reduction in services. You don't know, but you at least should plan for it. Um, because it's important, and I want to know as a grant reviewer. So let's say you are looking for 50,000, but we only think we can only have 30,000, or we only want to invest 30,000. So can you make up that additional 20, or does it just not make sense to fund your organization at all? If you are able to explain to us, like, we can get 20,000 from here, we may be like, okay, well, you show us the 20, we'll give you the 30. Life is good for 50. But you need to make sure that you have the contingency plans for the shortfalls. Sustainability, your reputation for financial management, those things are very much tied together. I'm not going to want to give you money if you don't have a reputation for managing money well. I don't know about you all, so I'll talk about my family. There are people in my family who, if you loan them money, just assume that it's a gift, because even with the best of intentions, something's going to happen. There's always something that happens. Oh, you loan me $100, I'm gonna get it back to you next Thursday. Oh, you know what? It's Friday, and you won't even believe what happened. They shorted my check. Okay, cool. You know what happened is that I lost it, or you know what, the kids had a thing that they needed to do. There's always something. And so if you have a reputation for financial management, it means that funding organizations will be more confident that if they give you the money, you will do those things that are necessary to keep your organization alive. You will do what's necessary to keep your organization moving along, because of your reputation. Previous performance is the best predictor of future performance, according to business and nonprofit leadership. Because what else do we have to go on? Everybody says that they're going to change the world. Everybody says they're going to do the right thing by the money. And so we need some basis to determine how likely is that to be true. And if you've always managed your money well, if you won awards, or you have a reputation for fiscal stewardship, or especially if your board does, then it's more likely that we'll feel comfortable investing that money in your organization for the delta that was described earlier. And also, is your funding estimate realistic? One of the things that happens with a lot of nonprofits is that they will adjust their budgets to meet the funding needs. And we all know that this happens. But if we're looking at what you say you're going to do, and based on our estimates, it's going to take about $150,000 to do it, but you're somehow telling us that you can get it done in 50,000. I'm going to need you to either explain that, or I'm just going to move to one of the other 19 grant applications on my desk. Because if you say that you're able to get it done and you can't explain how that's going to happen, I'm going to assume that you believe you're going to use magic, and we don't fund magic. Well, depends on what grant, but you get my point. By and large, we want to make sure that the estimate is realistic. Now, if you say that it's going to take 150, we need 50 from you because we have 2-to-1 match from an employer campaign. Oh, okay, that's different. If you say that we have a funder we have an individual who's going to be providing services pro bono, which means that we don't need the extra 150,000. Oh, okay, that's different. But you need to be able to explain why your funding estimate is realistic, because otherwise, why would we give you money? Any questions on this slide? Okay, let's go. Project budget. All right, so one of the things that you will notice is that along the way, I kept asking you to focus on the resources you need. Focus on the resources you need. Focus on the resources you need for activities. Focus on the resources you need. The reason why is that once we understand the resources that you need for each activity, then we can figure out how much those resources cost. So if we know that you are running a tutoring program or after school program and you need one tutor to tutor math, then we can go to, and I do it, because I've been in the situation where, you have no budget to low budget. And so what I do is I go to Idealist, Monster, Indeed, the Department of Labor, and I look up salary.com, and I look up what you would pay a tutor. I go to other organizations that have tutors and are hiring tutors or whatever and find out what they charge. And then I'll utilize that to serve as the basis of how much I am estimating in my budget that I will be paying tutors. Figuring out and doing that for each thing. Now, the other part of it is making sure that you're focused on resources and, excuse me, and not just money, because sometimes it's easier for you to access a resource than it is for you to access cash. Case in point, there was a young lady that I was working with at my previous employer, and she came to me and she said, I need you to help me put together a loan package for, is it like $3,000 or $4,000? And I was asking her what did she need it for. She said she had to get it. She had applied for a government contract. Um, and they had awarded it, but like a lot of government contracts, there was a bunch of hurry up and wait, and she really didn't think she had gotten it. She thought that she hadn't, and they just didn't tell her. And then one day they said, hey, we're ready to go, we can start the program in a month. Well, you need to be prepared to start the program in a month, and we need to see your space in the next 2 weeks. And so the space that she had been negotiating, it had passed. It had been months, and the person who had the space had rented it out. And so she was kind of stressing about, and she had already made arrangements with them that they were going to defer some of the payments. But now that she was in crunch time and having to work with new people, nobody was really interested in allowing her that grace. And so as I started asking her about what the specifics that she needed in that space, she got frustrated. And you can tell when somebody's like, why don't you just hurry up and answer my question or do what I need you to do and stop asking me all these random questions. And so what in our conversation, what I realized is that she didn't need the whole space. She just needed the training room, and she was going to also need part of the money to buy tables and chairs and things like that because she had a training program. And then, I asked her about offices when she needed it. And so what I realized was that she only needed the training space from 8 in the morning till noon, I think noon or 1 o'clock, 5 days a week. Well, I had a training space in my office that I only used in the evening. And so what we were able to do is to allow her to use that training space. And so it saved her $3,000 or $4,000 in debt. And also, we're not even sure that she would have qualified. What's more is that we were able to create a partnership in this, and she allowed me to present information to her participants, which also helped my program. And so because I was focused more on the resources that she needed, not just the cash, we were able not only to find a win-win, but also save her some money. When you are looking at your budget and putting it together, think about the cost of advertising and promotion, or in nonprofit parlance, it's called outreach. If your main way of outreach to your target population is to do Facebook ads, or not Facebook ad, but Facebook posts or social media posts, then that means that you need to walk through who's going to create the post. Does it need to have visuals along with it? Who's going to create that? Who's going to be responsible for posting it? Who's going to be responsible for monitoring the post and see how many likes and how many, people are seeing it? Are we going to actually buy Facebook ads? So making sure you think through all of those things, and the greater the detail, the more accurate your budget is going to be. Real estate and equipment. Another story, had a young lady who had gone through all of the steps that we talked about, and we came to the real estate line item, and I said, okay, how did you come up with this number? She said, I listened to you, and I did. She actually had done a floor plan mapping of what should happen in the space, and she said when she did the floor plan, she realized it was about the same amount of space that her apartment was, and so she what did she do? Oh, she said, so she estimated that it would be the same amount as her apartment, which was at the time $900 a month. So that was the budget estimate for her real estate. So what I suggested to her is that she reach out to a gentleman who I knew who was a real estate agent and did some business leasing or leasing of commercial spaces. And she talked to him, and he asked her questions that I hadn't thought about, because some of the equipment that she was using required upgraded electricity. Additionally, in the county that she was in, there was the business that she was going to operate couldn't be operated in a residential space. It had to be operated in I think it was business or commercial. I can't remember the way they described it, but those spaces had a premium on the rent. And so it wasn't 900, it was more like 1200. But if she hadn't called him and hadn't really gotten a real estimate, then her budget would have been short $4,000 off the break. Could you imagine going back to your funder and saying like, hey, remember that grant you just gave me? Would you happen to have an extra $3,600 that I can use? I'm going to let you know in advance that will not go well at all. So call somebody. Utilities, BG&E, they want to hear from you because they want to make sure that you are budgeting appropriately, because the more like if you budget appropriately, the more likely it is that you will have the money to pay them when the time comes. Same thing with insurance agents, lawyers, accountants, any of these people. Make sure that you call them in advance. The difference it would be when it comes to taxes and government fees that they normally are pretty clear about what those are, but certain taxes and things like that, they won't tell you how much you would owe, because they would consider that practicing accounting, or the same way they won't tell you about any legal issues that you may have, because the government doesn't practice law except on its own behalf. And so as you are looking through kind of these elements of the budget, please make sure that you're taking these and others into consideration. And additionally, if you've made any assumptions, because especially if you haven't started yet, all of these are what's called pro forma. And pro forma is just a fancy Latin word that means projections, things we're guessing about. Be able to articulate the assumptions that you made, and how you came up with these numbers, because, and I'll speak for myself, I am a really big stickler on trying to figure out how you came up with your number, because my job is to guard the money of the people that have hired me to do the grant review or the contract review. And so if I don't understand how you came up with your calculations, I may not be comfortable recommending that they give you money. Things about some of the extras that I think people should take into consideration when working through grant writing. The first is the grammar and spelling. If you are if you need your clients to fill out a from and not a form, that's going to be a problem. If I'm going to give you money, or recommend that the funder give you money, and in your application for funding, you can't spell things right, you didn't pay enough attention to the little squiggly line underneath, yeah, that's going to be a problem. So please make sure that you get some help, grammar and spelling help, or whatever. Be able to show your documentation. If you are citing a study, if you have research, make sure you have that available. The reality is, especially under 50,000, most people will not ask you for the documentation. But if you tell me that you have documentation, or you make reference to something and I ask you to see it and you're not able to provide it, that's at least a yellow flag for me. And please never forget during this entire time that there are 19 other applications on the desk. Make sure that you have credible partners. There was a young lady who who wanted to start a nonprofit organization, and she found a partner who talked the good talk, who was involved and engaged and knew seemed to know all of these things. But what the young lady did not know is that the partner had run a nonprofit organization, but that partner, um, she stopped running a nonprofit organization when the FBI showed up and started securing files. So everybody else in the community knew that this person did not have a reputation for financial management. But because she hadn't done her research, but because she didn't ask anybody, because she was new and just kind of jumped in, she associated herself with someone that the funders were not going to send money to. They had done that already, and it did not go well. Contact your funders. I don't mean stalk them and things like that, but let them before nobody wants. As we're entering an election cycle, one of the things that communities complain often about is that you never hear from certain politicians until they're ready for your vote. You don't want to be the funding equivalent of that. That you've never sent a newsletter, you've never tried to have a meeting until you need money. Now, there may be times where, that just makes sense because of the nature and the circumstances, or you may not even have known a funder existed until you need. But as you are planning this, if you have an opportunity, if you know who the funder is and you have an opportunity to meet with them, to ask, the project officer, if you could sit down and have a conversation and let them know, I'm not here for money yet. Just wanted to let you know what we're planning on doing, how we're going about it, and to see how we could best position ourselves to get funding, recognizing that they can't guarantee you anything by and large. But having that conversation with them and finding out when is appropriate to contact them, would they like to be on your mailing list, and those types of things can go a very long way in establishing that relationship. Because like I said before, it's not just about who you know, it's what they know about you and whether they will advocate for you in rooms that you are not in. Are there any questions on this slide? Anything else you want me to address?